Rajka, good morning, good afternoon.
Hello, sir. Namaste. Good evening.
Namaste.
Dr. Iturbe, perhaps we can start?
Yes.
All right.
Okay, so very good evening to all of you to this second lecture on this series of 3 lectures on thinking visually in Western culture. So as you already know, I think most of you have attended the first lecture. So we have Professor Alfons Puigarnau from the International University of Catalonia in Barcelona. Last week, he spoke about the topic from myth to logos. It was an introduction in the issue of Neoplatonism. And today, in this second lecture, the topic is theology and the visual arts, and will be an analysis, a relationship of between arts and Neoplatonism, and then also how Western religious art evolved, the importance of Plotinus also in the area of the first Christian art in the first centuries, and some others philosophers like the Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite, Saint Augustine, and the relations with the religious art. And within this also it will be mentioned the importance of this European medieval cathedrals. So once again, I'm grateful to Professor Alfons for his availability, and I invite him to give us the lecture. Today, the plan will be that he will speak for around an hour, and then we'll have half an hour for questions and answers.
Thank you very much, Professor Mariano. Thank you again to the Somaiya University, your department, and especially to Professor Supriya and also Professor Pracha. Let me, to start, let me make a summarize of the first session, where it was so important to start with this first issue, which was first to compare Western Neoplatonism with Advaita Hinduism, and here in Western Neoplatonism, more especially is the work of Plotinus in 6 Aeneadas. From here, we were able to basically explain different kind of differences. We talk about the dualism as philosophical and religious system, right? And here we commented on the so-called non-dualism shared by both Plotinus and Advaitism, right? There was also a second point of study, which was the comparative philosophy methodology as important to step on our topic. Here, I have to say that we talked a lot about something which is quite important, which is that in the Eastern, let's say, India, say, Sanskrit, the importance of the aesthetics of sound, whereas we say here the aesthetics of visuality and the human eye. Right? So, sorry, because there are some little mistakes, but at the end, we concluded in some way about these from mythos to logos, which allowed us to start dropping on new themes, no? Like from stories to philosophies, from, let's say, myths to reason, which obviously in Plotinus, it was all based in the corpus Platonicum, whereas in Advaitism, it was from Upanishads, right? So I think this is a good scheme to start thinking on art, on how we can make the art of philosophy in this Western culture. Because ultimately, this seminar has gonna be through a study of culture. Let's then go back to my own image. I take advantage of this opportunity to say hello to Professor Elena Rocky from the United States of America, special guest today. Thank you very much, Elena, for coming with us. I hope that Antonio is also with us from Barcelona and some other colleagues and friends. So, based on this blackboard, these 3 points, we have to say, well, we are in front of the Hellenistic period, which is more or less about 3rd, 4th century after modern era, where a deep rationalism is dominating culture. In this very system has appeared Plotinus as a Greek Alexandrian philosopher, theologian, which mysteriously is very keen on the system of so-called emanation, a non-dualistic system. But suddenly it appears a new factor. It appears someone in the province of Palestine, in the Middle West part of the Roman Empire, who says that he is the Logos as human and as God. And this is, I mean, this is a revolution. This is a revolution. Of course, this man who has been historically demonstrated, it has not been historically demonstrated that he was God. But we have a lot of evidences, whether in the north of Palestine or in Jerusalem, as well as through the manuscript collection of the Qumran at the north of, at the east of Jerusalem, very near to the Dead Sea, that something like a prophet, someone who was promised in the Jewish tradition to come and to save the people of Israel, it seems that someone like that appeared. Why this is important for us? Well, this is important for us because it seems that from the very antiquity, we can step from kind of irrational myths. I know that for modernity, myths are not irrational, but we have to read this situation from that very period. We come from irrational myths, stories, things that in some way impossible. I quoted the example of Atlantis, or I quoted the example of Romulus as the founder of the city of Rome, as read through Plutarch. Then we realize from the Greek tradition that at the very center of things, there is a word, and the word is this logos, this reason, which is at the very center of the whole cultural situation. And then now we have to see what happens to philosophy, what happens to art when someone is self-postulating himself as being this logos, this word of God that has become human flesh. When we go to Rome and when we really want to see what is this Roman art, but we have to say that it is also Greek art. I'm looking for this document now. Let me see, which is have to share with you. Okay, I'm going to share this one with you. Okay, let's go to. So when I'm telling you that when we talk about these logos in art, in space, we have to drop on this phenomenal building of the first century of the modern era, which is the so-called Pantheon of Agrippa in the Piazza Pantheon of Rome. Here we see a kind of first atrium structure, which is a peristyle of columns, who gives the openness to this kind of temple. We have a threshold here. We have a big frontispiece in triangular manner, but we just guess that this is going to be a dome space. This dome space is like this. So it's a circular space which has a gigantic structure, kind of, we say, entablature, which is giving this, we say, drum, which is gonna elevate the circular dome, which is the biggest of the whole antiquity, which was finished in bronze, firstly, which is crowned by a so-called oculos in Greek, or big eye. This big eye is given to heaven and is connecting with earth. It's like when the foundation of the city of Rome, that with that very sacrifice, that mundus excavated, that semicircular mundus excavated on the ground, was like this big, like human eye. All around these walls, there were to be the Roman gods. This is now a Christian church, but what is the name of this building for now? It is the name Pantheon, no? So, and what is this big oculus in the center? This big oculus in the center is the Pantheos, is the synthesis of all these divinities that in Roman times were in tabernacles attached to the walls, right? We say from myth to logos, but here, what is the logos? The logos is the centrality of this building as given by this kind of monotheistic theological structure. This is, of course, studied from geometry to say that this monotheistic theological concept is paired with a highly Pythagorean and highly mathematic study of reality. Here we see this atrium, which is a kind of passage between the outside, between the street, between the profane, so to speak, between the urban space and the core of the sacred space. So that this is a space for passage. It is a space for first meditation. It is a space of transition. Even though in the very outside of this temple, we have the cosmic sun. When we walk through this kind of atrium, it is darkened, so that we walk through the darken, we enter through the threshold, and then a central illumination from the logos, from the Pantheos, is coming from the zenith of this huge vaulted space. This is a section where ultimately we see this transition, and then we see the oculus, and then we see this structure, which is ultimately a kind of globe, a kind of big human eye that is talking to us about what? About the realism of the world, the realism, the realistic relationship between the subject, which is us, and the object, which is reality. That's why we have to talk now about how Romans saw this same reality through painting, and more specifically through his predominant art of portrait. It is very impressive to know that from a religious perspective, the Mithraic religions, before burying the corpses of people that have passed away in the patrician classes, people more well off, they used to represent in a realistic portrait the face, and even though the style, and even though the charisma of that person who had passed away. Here we realize how is this Roman, let's say rhetorical, let's say Ciceronian and Quintilian society, where this predominion of the logos as pronounced politically, this predominium of rhetorics as said by Longinus in his treatise on sublimity, this use of the word in the public space. The word was used at the very center of the Pantheon, but it was used in the public place, in the agora, and it was used by Paul of Tarsus when he traveled to Athens and he speaks to the Greeks in this very first century of the modern era. Here we see plenty of jewelry with a very nice costume, with natural colors, how this lady, plenty of colors, and with a very special design in her hair, how this person is in some way of this world. This is not a distracted, this is not a theologian, this is not a priest. This is someone who was really living that life. The same we can say about this man. No? This is a man tanned by the sun of south of Italy. These tablets were painted. These are small tablets, wooden tablets that were held in the domus, in the houses of the Romans, and that received the cult of the people alive, the cult of the to the beyond, the cult to the souls of the people who had disappeared by an accident or by age or someone. No? So look at how the sight of this man is almost steering us and making us questions about the past, about the present, about the future. So this is the realism of logos. As well as in sculpture. In sculpture is so impressive to see this old man carved in the marble, to say, well, here am I have lived many years and I am maybe about to finish. This which very often were politicians, were senators, even though were sometimes emperors. This is the Emperor Adrian, no? For example, in the fashion, the costume of the imperial period, also with this strong likeness to reality. All of these portraits, all of these paintings were very attached to this word, which is the word of rationality, the word of imitation, the word of a kind of scientific approach to reality. But then, as I said before, something happened. This Messiah for the Jewish people was called Christ, and the pagan Roman historians call him some Christos, and some group of people started to believe in this Christos that it seems that was died with the punishment of the cross, the typical Roman punishment. Thousands of people died nailed to the cross, but it seems that this man, Christ, was different. And a group of people started to believe, especially in the cities, in Jerusalem, then in Rome, then in Corinth, then in Thessalonica, then, and of course, in India. It is said that the Apostle Thomas went to India for the conversion and Christianization of India, and suddenly started the persecution, and these people started to bury their died families outside the walls of Rome in this place called the catacombs. The catacombs were, during the Middle Ages, abandoned, were disappeared until the people of the Renaissance started to be reinterested in these places, and then went through stairs and they observed these strange places, which were plenty of tombs with no names. And then they started to research the collectors of the Italian Renaissance, and then they discovered places like this that nowadays they can be visited. I have been here many times, where all of these carved tombs in the so-called tuffo. The tuffo is a kind of solid clay. It's quite soft, but it's quite resistant. This is underground. This is under the underneath, and it was plenty of corpses, and these were, because of the persecutions, the first places of Christian cult. In these very catacombs, many paintings are found. Paintings like this. This is the prophet Daniel, who is throughout the lions, and who, in defending his Jewish faith, protected by Yahweh, was not attacked by these lions. This is the first images of this man, this Christ, so-called the eternal word of God, to be made man with these two natures, the human nature and the divine nature in one person. Programs like this, that sometimes they have been called like the Paleo-Christian Sistine Chapel, right, are around Rome and in other provinces of the Roman Empire, so that, sorry for the low quality of this, so that, and we have to now return to Plotinus, so that Plotinus, who was not a Christian philosopher, who was not a Christian theologian, who, and we know this for sure, didn't know about the treaty of the Christians, the Old Testament, but also the New Testament, this man was used as in his very Neoplatonic ideas, it was presented to the Roman painters to create the new Christian art. So this is a mixture. Let me show you this. This is the Roman portrait art, and this is the new Christian art. So it's said in 1945 by André Grabar, the French archaeologist, who has said, look, a Roman painter cannot pass from this realistic, from this naturalistic way of making portraits to this idealistic, to this so abstract, to this so detached from nature way of representing a man. What is the key point? In order to understand how Christians were able to represent things like this. This is a miracle that comes in the Gospel of Saint Luke, which is the miracle of Christ with this woman who was constantly losing her blood. This woman who had spent all her fortune, all her money in doctors to be cured, and who suddenly thinks, well, if this Christ is the Logos of God incarnate, I will go and I will touch his garments and I will be cured. And this is the representation of this miracle. Look to this new aesthetics. We have no background, we have no architectural references, we have no intention of making portraits. These faces are idealized. And it seems that this concept of emanationism from Plotinus, this idealization of reality, which is coming from Plotinus, is in some way learned by the Roman pagan painters in order to represent this new religion, which is not, for the very first time, a non-dualistic religion. It's a dualistic religion, as you see. This is Christ, this is one. This is the Christian, this is the other one. There is a dialogue here. It is a very Socratic religion. It is a very Stoic religion because it is a religion of suffering. It is a religion of self-denial, and it is a religion of hope and a religion of promise. And I was telling that for the very first time, time here is not cyclical. Time here is linear. When we analyze the Pantheon in its circular structure. We see the circularity of the Roman time. We see the circularity of the so-called eternal return of time. Everything is repeated. Everything is repeated. In fact, both Neoplatonism and Advaitism, they are two philosophical and theological cyclical systems where everything comes, goes, and returns again. Everything, we are kind of intermediate creatures who start from the most spiritual, who fall to the matter, to the non-being, in order to return again to the light. And this is a cyclical system. Whereas with this Logos Christ, we have a new system. We are created, we live this life between the first time, which is the Alpha, and the last time, which is the Omega, following the Greek alphabet. And between the Alpha and the Omega, we live with Christ. This is a representation of Christ, the founder of this religion, but not also the founder, but himself as God, who is hallowed with this disc of light, and this religion, as well as Neoplatonic Platonism, is a theology of light, because the nous at the very first of this system is a son of light. So this is a Christ, son of light. No? And the Christian life is to be in the earth as a kind, as if passing through a bridge where the start is the Alpha and the end is the Omega. And with this end, which is our end, is a restarting. So this is not a cyclical scheme. This is, of course, the comparison of these scenes of the catacomb in the Roman Empire until the 4th century, and this is the frescoes in one of these villas in Pompeii called the Villa of Fanius Sinistor, where we see the ordinary life in Rome, but with this, I insist in this realistic, plenty of architectural references, a ground, and an atmospherical, realistic space that we by no means find in the catacomb. There is it seems that there is a microphone activated around, but we are all right. We can keep going. So you see how we started with the most antique traditions, religious and philosophical in India, which are, as far as they are oral, they are verbal. We don't know exactly where do they start, but we talk about thousands of years. We have talked about Plotinus, 3rd, 4th century after in modern era. We talked about the Indian Thomas Aquinas, which is Shankara, who is about the 12th century of the modern era. And now we have stepped on the Roman Empire, where Plotinus from Alexandria wrote his Aeneas, and the birth of a new Western religion, who is going to be at the very center of the European cultural roots, even though until today. We have compared this realistic Roman art of the first centuries with the first Christian art based in this promised Messiah for the Jews, who ultimately has really come. And we have talked about these archaeological evidences from the manuscripts and papyrus of the Qumran, as well as the so-called holy places in Jerusalem. In the 4th century, a professor of rhetorics, a man with no real religious convictions, a man who was the son of a Christian family, a brilliant man who used to be a professor of rhetorics, the main art of the Roman times, and who lived between the 4th and the 5th century of the modern era, born in Tagaste, North Africa, more or less the contemporary Argelia, and who knew in the 4th century the Bishop of Milano, this city at the north of Italy, and who attended his homilies, his speeches in the Cathedral of Milano, so that this man, whose name was Augustine of Hippo, or more commonly known as Saint Augustine, who wrote many things. He wrote many things, but he was ultimately converted to Christianity when he was 33 years old. He wrote a very famous work, which is an early work, as The City of God. He wrote in his medium ages his famous treatise on the Christian Trinity, and about to die, he wrote his own autobiography called Confessions. Through these works, we know many things about his thought. Saint Augustine had the pleasure and the luck of reading Plotinus, and he himself became a Neoplatonic Christian thinker. He envisaged that ultimately this idea of the Logos, this idea of the nous of Plotinus, was really the Christian God, and he used the word used by Plotinus, hypostasis, which means substance, which means kind of what is the important thing of something? It is the substance. That in Greek, called by Plotinus, is hypostasis. Hypo means under, and stasis mean what is. So hypostasis, substance, means what is underneath. What is the concept that makes something to be as it is? Okay, this very notion of hypostasis that Plotinus had used for his definition of the nous, for his definition of the intellect, and for his definition of the soul in that very scheme that I showed you last week. This hypostasis is used by Augustine in his definition of the Christian Trinity, where there is a Father, there is a Son, Christ, and there is a Spirit, who are in some way three hypostases which are united in one and unique divinity. This is the famous central mystery of the Christian faith. And Augustine opens for us the period of the Middle Ages. The Roman Empire is going to fall in Western in the year 476. And then with the falling of the Roman Empire, all these tribes from the north, we say the Celtics, the Sueves, the Vandals, the Alans. In fact, Augustine was killed by the Alans in the invasion of the Alans of North Africa, caught Augustine and killed him. But also in the Italian peninsula, the Lombards, the Etruscs, the tribes of the Angles in what is the United Kingdom today, the tribes of the Germans, and all these people went from the cold north to the hot south, and they managed to mix up with the Roman culture. And to this mix up, we call the Middle Ages. That's why I want to share with you what is called kind of the first international Western style in the Middle Ages, which is going to be also founded, not also by Augustine, but not only by Augustine, but also by a new Neoplatonic philosopher. We have seen Plotinus, we have seen Proclus, we have seen Augustine, and now at the 6th century of the modern era, we have to talk about Dionysius the Areopagita. Now, let me share with you this again fascinating new art which is born out of all of these art of philosophy, which is the Romanesque art. The Romanesque art is called because in some way it is not the Roman, but it is the Roman art intermingled with the so-called invasions art. These invasions of the Germans, of the Celtics, and so on, as mixed up with the Roman art, gives as a brilliant result the Romanesque art. The Romanesque art is, of course, present in architecture, in painting, in sculpture, in goldsmith, and so on, but has kind of this aspect. No? What is this aspect? As far as we can see in this image, this is a Romanesque cathedral. It has, as you see, and as we will see, the shape of a cross, a Latin cross, which is the cross of Christ. It has kind of small windows, so this is a very dark interior space. It's a very kind of wall space, because all of this huge space is founded in a system of walls. This is a system of walls. That's why this is a so sculptural, a so volumetric, and a so opaque space, so that from the outside we cannot see the inside, and from the inside we cannot see the outside. The very aspect of this space is like this. It's, I mean, we have barely windows, and sometimes we have later additions for bigger windows. But as you see, it's a very closed space, right? And this has obviously a philosophical and a theological meaning. And this meaning is coming from Dionysius the Areopagiticum, or from the so-called Corpus Areopagiticum, where this Dionysius of the 6th century of the modern era wrote about a concept which is the so-called the negative theology. We cannot, he says, define God by what he is, because he is in some way too much to receive a definition, but we can define God as what he is not. And this denial, which is very philosophical and very theological, is giving an interior space which is by denial of God, and to this it is called the apophasis. It is the denial of God, whereas the cataphasis is the affirmation of God. Dionysius of Areopagite is postulating that we have to define God more as darkness than as light. That's why we see this kind of heavy interior spaces, no? Heavy architectures, very thick columns, no? Obviously it is a space with a central axe. Sometimes it has a central nave, but other times, if they are big, they have lateral naves. This is a Roman space. I mean, this space is coming from the Roman antiquity, but very often it has in the floor plan, as we will see, the sign of the cross. All of these spaces, Romanesque, Western architectural spaces, they follow more or less the same rules. That's why we call to this style the first international European style, where every church, every space is pointing to the east, where, as you see here, the sun rises, because this cosmic sun rising is Christ rising from the death. Christ is the sun who comes from the east and dies to the west. From the very exterior point of view, this is for me, it's a very beloved church, because this is in the Catalan Pyrenees, no, in my country. You see a big tower, no? Of course, that this is a cosmic tower. I mean, this is a connection between heaven and earth, and this is very important. Then this is a little church with the main apse pointing to the east, where Christ's sun is, and two lateral apses, one here and the other one at the other side. This is, well, this has influences, this is of the 12th century, has influences from the Lombard Romanesque, and Lombardia is North Italy. And on purpose, I always like to show people architecture in black and white, because it can be much better. But imagine that we are kind of Christians in this period. We're used to the colors of the landscape, of the land, the browns, the yellows, the greens, no? But suddenly we enter into this little temple, and what we see is this. So it's a so high contrast, no? Between this exterior of stone, no? Of no color, which is in fact represents a city, the heavenly Jerusalem, where during the Middle Ages we're invited to step on inside, and in the central apse, we see something like this. And what is this? Well, this is in the lower registers. This is the earth. These are the saints. I would say, I don't know, but I would say that this, in comparison with the Hinduism, these saints would be the gurus, maybe the gurus. And then in the upper part of this space, it is the heaven with the Logos sitting on a rainbow. It's a cosmic symbol, which is in an almond of light. This almond of light is, of course, pointing to the east. And he's appearing to say, I am the light of the world. This is the hand of the Father. And these are the four symbols of the four Gospels that today we are not gonna explain. So in a bit more detail, this is what we see. This is a very well-known work of art. This is now at the National Museum of Catalan Art in Barcelona. Some of you have seen this directly, again with the alpha and omega of the first Christian art, and with this inscription from the Gospel of St. John saying, Ego sum lux mundi, so I am the light of the world. And he is blessing with his right hand. This is the rainbow, as I said. And these are the garments of a king, a judge, and a priest. Because this logos, Christian logos, is king, is priest, and is judge. His face is like this. I mean, this is something very Roman, but it is idealized by this concept of negativity. When we define God, we cannot use affirmations, but we need to use denials. And because I'm checking, I see that I have maybe 5 minutes more, Professor Mariano. Yes, I don't hear you, but...
Yes, you have spoken for 55 minutes already. So you have some 5-10 minutes more.
Okay, thank you very much.
To you.
So, as you see, we are in fascination because it's quite difficult to explain as a first thing from logos to mythos, and now, from mythos to logos, and now to say, well, and what is the destination of these logos? No? And for me, it's difficult to explain all these from our own Western culture and our own Western religion, but in full complementarity with your own beliefs. I mean, I want to understand, and I have studied a lot, what is the psychological and what is the philosophical and theological structure of Hinduism, even though historically, artistically, and aesthetically. And I'm now trying to to make this play, no, between, because all of us, we are human, and inside all of us is this logos. So that it's quite difficult for me, but we are getting on that. Say how to play these traditions in order to understand our own ourselves. So that at the very end of these Middle Ages starts something which is for us is not so common. Is that starts the so-called urban life. I know that in India, the big cities are very antique, but in Europe, the big cities are quite new. And then until this period, which is more or less between the 12th and the 13th century of the modern era, until this period, the cultural life in Europe was in monasteries. Because there was no cities, and then there were big buildings of stone with wise people studying there. And what were they studying? They were studying the classics, the Greeks and the Romans, and they were copying in books all the contents of these classics. Now, when we start this Gothic period, we have to understand that in this Gothic period, which starts in the late 12th century and the beginning of 13th century, all of these corpus Neoplatonicum, so we talk about Plotinus, Proclus, Augustine, Pseudo-Dionysius, and other Christian Neoplatonic thinkers like Gregorius of Nyssa or Gregorius of Nazarius or Basilius, or even though Jerome, no? All of these people suddenly, which were attached to the Neoplatonic tradition, were present, their writings in the University of Paris, where suddenly arrived the writings of a follower of Plato called Aristotle, and sometimes Plotinus. To the work of Plotinus, people call the Theology of Aristotle. So in some way, although Aristotle he breaks with the Platonic ideas of Plato, in some way, he can also be considered Neoplatonic because he was a pupil of Plato, but in a different sense that of Plotinus. In this University of Paris, he was born the first Studium Generale, and it was born kind of the first attempt to make faith and religion compatible. I know that for the Hindu tradition, this doesn't make any sense, because for the Hindu tradition, faith and religion are all the same. But we Europeans, we Westerns, are more, I would say, polarized. We are more, we have this dualistic character, no? And this is our history. No? So that in this very period, no, of the 12th, 13th century, recently it has been discovered a book by an architect and a wise man called Villard Donnecourt that you see in this image, with his designs to prepare all of these new architectural devices, different from the Romanesque type of space, with, as you see, an increasing complexity in the floor plan and in the construction of these new buildings. Of course, the logos here at the left-hand side is represented, because at the very center of the so-called cathedrals, it is again this logos. You see how instead of the simplistic one-ups or triple-ups Romanesque architecture of walls, here we have a complex polylobulated perimeter for the head of this church that, even though it's going to have the shape of a cross, and here at the very middle, the representation of logos. This is the album of Villard Donnecourt. It's a great lesson on how to make faith and reason, philosophy and religion compatible. These are different designs. This is seen from above, so these are like floor plans, no? And look how he is designing, he's studying all the time how all these spaces could be. But here the corpus Platonicus is very present. Here we see different structures. No? This book is of the 13th century, but I want you to observe these images where the Neoplatonic idealism of Plotinus, but also from Dionysius the Areopagite, is set up, no? Through geometry. For Villard Donnecourt and for the Gothic masters, figures are solved through geometry. So geometry is ideal forms, and then reality shapes following Neoplatonism with these ideal forms, like this as well. No, say this is a horse, this is a man, this is the logos as well. No, and how this author is working with all of these complex concepts. Where and how the Gothic style was born? It was born in the so-called Church of Saint Denis And this Saint Denis was precisely Saint Denis the Neoplatonic, or Saint Denis the Areopagiticus. No? Here, these are 3 steps in this same church. First step is the Carolingian 8th century original building. Second step is the Romanesque reformation of this building, and this is the Gothic Reformation, right? What is relevant here? Relevant here is that in this church, here I wanted to show you, because this is very important to understand what is the Gothic style. This is the primitive Carolingian church. This is the first Gothic church. This is the first Gothic church. And all around is the second Gothic church. What is relevant here? What is relevant here is that a certain abbey of Saint Denis read the writings of the Dionysius the Areopagite and decided to make a new type of space following the Neoplatonic ideas, where in these 2 parts, in this, the head of the church, and in this, the atrium of the church. We have to see this. This is the Carolingian, this is the Romanesque, and this is how the Abbey Suger of Saint Denis, the Areopagite in France, decided and managed to change this part of the church, and so this one. What does this mean? This means that instead of the walls in stone, the Gothic church is gonna replace the walls in stone by the walls in glass, and more specifically, the walls in colorful glass. This is a very Neoplatonic idea on how, in some way, we can envisage the heaven from earth. This is a very, again, idealistic target. No? At the very center, always, it is the Logos. This is the church of Saint Denis. This is the exterior of the oculus, the exterior. This is the shape, and this is the interior. So it's a colorful interior space that next day we can talk more about this. And these are the type of verticalism, which is typical from these Neoplatonical ideals. This is the Santa Chapelle of Paris. This is the chapel of the King of France, no? Which is almost everything is crystal. No? And this is obviously revolutionary for Western culture and, if you like, for everybody of us. Thank you very much for today. And I see that you have some questions in the chat, but I am available for you in these forthcoming minutes.
Thank you, Professor Alfons, for this wonderful presentation. Really fascinating travel through history and through the centuries. And well, you mentioned St. Augustine, so St. Augustine begins his autobiography with that. No, you have made us for you, and we are restless till we rest on you. So we have seen this manifested in the different periods of art throughout the centuries. So yes, I think there are some questions in the chat, and whoever wants to raise his or her hand, please ask any question you would like. The question that is in the chat is from Himanshu Gupta. the combination of triangle is similar to worldly art.
Yes, I see that. Well, we have to say that geometry is geometry, in the sense that geometry does not belong to this culture or this other, to this religion or to this other system of thought, no? And then there is a kind of natural religion everywhere, which is based on beauty, which is based on proportions. And I don't know about this worldly art. I would like very much to know about this and getting in touch with this worldly art. But I'm sure that it's an art proper to cosmic, proper to natural beauty, and it makes sense that the triangles of the cathedrals, it makes sense that they are similar to worldly art, or worldly art to this similar to these cathedrals. Himanshu Gupta, thank you very much for your question. If you want to add something, Himanshu. There is another question, or different more questions, where it says, Nitin Kulkarni, can we say that deviation from realistic representation towards idealistic and abstract is due to Neoplatonism? It's a very clever question because we have to say yes, although it's not only Neoplatonism, but as far as Neoplatonism gives us this capacity of extracting models from reality, or even though from subjectivism, creating abstract models to project on reality, it is true that Neoplatonism, because of its very idealism, it's very keen to abstract art. Okay? So artists, we can say modern or contemporary, or even the postmodern artists, also partly due to the contribution of the two world wars, because this is also this has also to be considered, they step on abstraction through this idea of Platonism. So in the sense that you make this question, Platonism would lead to subjectivism, and subjectivism would lead to abstractionism. We can say Picasso, we can say the School of New York with Achille Gorky, we can say before Kazimir Malevich in Russia, no? You can say Kirchner in Germany, you can say in Switzerland, the Dadaism, no? So we have many manifestations of that. And is that a deviation? Well, this would be maybe the object of another seminar, no? Say, to what extent abstraction is a deviation, or it's something good and interesting. There is another question here, says, it is a mural narrative tribal art where the triangle is the dominating figure for depicting human forms as well as animals. Well, here I would say that the same answer would be given to this question than the previous one. So it is the connection between philosophy, art, and nature, right? Now the triangle, it's a very perfect shape, especially if it's a triangle with the same sizes in the same sides. You know? It is a more perfect figure than others, because with the triangle you have the equidistance, and with the triangle you can have the plurality of the angles together with the unity of the triangle. You see the Egyptian pyramids, for example. So in some way the triangle may be more perfect than the square or the circle. But this is again this natural beauty that we can find easily from tribes, I mean, with an unsophisticated system of cultures as well. There is another question that you say, if we find any symbolic similarities between the geometric references you mentioned and the geometric representations in tantric traditions. Okay. Well, here we have to move into more the circle, right? I mean, the circle is it's a less it's a more difficult to understand the circle than the triangle, because the circle means eternity, right? And the circle is a square rotated. So the circle is perfection, but it is also to try to understand everything from the center. And also, it is to try to understand the center from the perimeter. So the circle and the sphere is a more complex form, but whether in tantric traditions, in Christian religions, even though in the Jewish religion, in the Islamic religion, the circle is a symbol of perfection. But it is also a symbol of the difficulty to understand this perfection, right? We have seen the circle in the Roman Pantheon, we have seen the circle in these stained glasses in the cathedrals, we see the circle around. I have to tell you that, at least in the Western cultures, I would say that provisionally, the circle is lost. So in postmodernity, we don't have the circle. And this is a cultural problem that it's very important. But as I said, this would be another topic. Okay, it's circle attached to tradition. That's right. And Nihil says whether the subjectivism I mentioned is with art making or perception by viewers. Okay. Yeah. Let's see. This is because this is coming with the birth of aesthetics as a, so to speak, science. Aesthetics as science were born. Aesthetics is the science of beauty and of Aesthetics means from aesthesis, the Greek means sensitivity. But aesthetics as a science was born in the 18th century in Germany. It was the first treatise of aesthetics was Baumgarten in the year 1750. And it was considered to be kind of the poor relative of science. The poor relative of science, in a kind of pseudoscience, so that aesthetics for Baumgarten couldn't be considered as a plenty scientific status. But it coincided with the starting of the so-called transcendental idealism of Immanuel Kant, especially of Immanuel Kant, right? Now, this subjectivism that you are asking about is a system of thought, right? That was born in Kant and Baumgarten in aesthetics and philosophy of art in the 18th century, and it is vigent until now. But before, and this will be the topic of the next seminar, before this, the art is not meant to be subjective. It is meant to be objective, right? So the more objective is the creation of art, the more objective is the perception by viewers. The more subjective is the creation of art, the more subjective can be the perception by viewers. That's why, if we can, next week we are going to talk about, I am in Florence, and we are going to talk about this revolution of objectivism in art through the discovery by Brunelleschi at the doors of the Baptistery of Florence, which is nearby my house here in Florence, the discovery of the perspective as a way of objectivism in the artistic approach to reality. I think that there are no more questions. I have to thank you for the dynamism of the session of today. It seems that to be less people is better for everyone, although we are gonna keep promoting this activity. But I enjoy very much, and I'm sure that we all together learn one from each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Alfonso, once again. I think the questions have been very good questions. You have replied them well also, and well, really, we have reached even in time. So I invite all of you to next session that will be next Monday on art, thought, and experience. And unless there is something else, perhaps we can conclude today's session. So thank you very much, and see you again next Monday.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Puigarnau. Thank you.
Priya, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
We see you next week.
See you. Thank you.
Shall I close the meeting?
Yes, please.